Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started with Mr. Klint Walker. Mr. Klint Walker is a cybersecurity advisor for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, AFCEA, part of the Department of Homeland Security. So as I was working as the state CIO for Georgia G6, people would ask me, what is my biggest fear? What would keep me up at night? So what keeps me up at night is the stuff that Klint's fixing to start talking about. Or when I had a pleasure of working with him for a few months there as the CIO. So, sir, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Klint Walker, and I am with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's okay if you haven't heard about us. We are a relatively new organization. But before I get into that, though, as my good friend Tony Stark would say, it's good to be back. So I just want to say this is the first in-person speaking engagement I've had in over a year. So I've done over 120 virtually, but I love being up on stage. I like to see my audience. This way I get to watch you fall asleep instead of just guessing whether or not you're sleeping behind the monitor. So we at CISA, we are the nation's risk manager. And even though I am a cybersecurity advisor, today I'm going to be talking to you more about risk analysis, and I'm going to be talking about the domino effect. I'm going to show you kind of what happened. I'm going to use the Colonial Pipeline as kind of an example, but we could put anything into its place. It doesn't matter what it is or where it is. You can see how all of this kind of fits together. But we at CISA, we are responsible for the nation's federal networks. But more than that, we're responsible also for critical infrastructure. So the federal networks for us is relatively easy because we control those. But 80% of critical infrastructure is not owned or operated by the federal government. So how do you do security for something that you don't own or operate? You can either regulate it or you can do voluntary services. Believe it or not, the federal government does not like to be in the regulatory business. It's slow, it's cumbersome. We would prefer to be voluntary, come in and assist people and help them out. But what am I talking about when I talk about critical infrastructure? There are 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, and each one of those sectors is going to have subsectors underneath of it. We've already heard a great presentation from the general here about the DoD and you know, kind of how they fit into everything, but all these other things that happen out there. The 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, these are infrastructure components that the federal government says are too big to fail, that an impact to one of them impacts everything else that we do as our great nation. So we keep an eye on these things, and we're there to help trying to protect them. You've all heard this story. You know, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of the shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. And for want of the rider, the message was lost. The message, the battle was lost. And for the battle, the kingdom was lost, all for the want of a nail. It's an old story, but it shows exactly what we're doing today. I'm going to change it up for you. For want of the data, the asset was lost. Think about encryption. Think about a cyber attack. Think about ransomware. Because that asset was lost, the process was lost. And because the process was lost, we lost the system. And when the system was down, we lost operations. And once operations was down, we could no longer provide the service. And once the service was gone, we can no longer support the mission. All because of the data. Originally, when I tried to fix this up, I used the word computer in place of asset, but it's more than that. When we think about things from a holistic level, it's the asset, because data can reside on different things. It could be a computer, but it might also be a person. How many of you have ever had somebody retire in your organization and all the information in their head walked out the door the day they did? You know, that's what we're talking about, is these things all have an impact, and that impact cascades and flows and causes things to happen. When we come in as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, when we come in and do assessments, we always talk to people about asset management. That's the first thing we always talk about. And people always jump right into IT management. Everything they show us is how they keep track of computers. And we're like, whoa, we're talking about assets. How do you keep track of your people? What people have what skills to do what job? Where can they be most beneficial to you? What information do you need? What databases? What schemas? What technology? And then the actual computers themselves, and then the facilities that house those, or the facilities or the things that make those mobile. That's what we talk about when we're talking about assets. All of these things are critical to how something operates. You lose even one of these, you impact the operations. You lose the operations, you've lost the service. If you lose the service, you've lost the mission. That's the way that we look at things at CISA. When we're coming in to assist you, we're not worrying about just your computers. We're worrying about every single part of that system, every single thing that might have data that is going to keep you from doing your mission. Because that's what we're talking about, the domino effect. It has many terms out there. You can call it the shock wave, the ripple effect, the butterfly effect, chain reaction, snowball, quicksand, or my favorite, the cascading parade of failure. At the Department of Health and Human Service, and I know we have Al sitting out here in the audience, we once did a network refresh where we were taking out our battery backups and putting in new ones, and we decided to do a circuit cutover at the same time. As the information security officer for that, I demanded that we had 4 redundancy plans ready to go, 4 levels deep. And that weekend when we did this, we watched each and every single one of those plans go down. Our generators failed. The circuit couldn't come back up. The battery backups wouldn't go in easily. The vendors couldn't do things. Somebody crashed and hit a power pole, knocking out the redundant circuit we were going to put in. We watched as everything failed, one beyond what we had. And that's the problem, is we didn't go even one more deep. You know, I'm a huge Futurama fan. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it or anything like that, but there's a great episode in which they're flying a tanker, and they said, oh no, all 1,000 holes have been breached. Well, if only we had 1,001. You know, that's what we're looking at here. That is the domino effect. It's when you disrupt an asset. So in the case of ransomware, and you're all very lucky today, is I'm not going to be talking to technology today. I'm going to keep things at a very high level. But let's say that you get hit by ransomware and you lose your computers. That doesn't impact just losing the computers. You've lost all access to that data. I go into a lot of organizations and they always tell me, well, we'll just fail over to our manual process. We'll go back to pen and paper. Had a police department once, swore up and down that they would fall back over to the way that they used to do things. They would go back to pen and paper. They could still respond to calls, pen and paper. Well, they got hit by ransomware. I asked them how their pen and paper method went, and they're like, we kind of forgot that none of the new people know how to do pen and paper. We've never trained them on that. All of our people that did pen and paper retired. So yeah, we're down hard. And that's what we're looking at today, is that one thing spirals into 2 things. Those 2 things, suddenly now you can't do your services. It's more than just one service you can't provide. It's probably 2 different services you can't provide. And then you've lost the mission. It happens that fast. So let's take a look at this. But we got to set the stage for this, because nothing ever happens in a vacuum. We could look at Colonial Pipeline in a vacuum, but that doesn't set the stage for why and how things cascade the way they do. This is where the risk analysis part comes in. A lot of people, when we go into an organization, they say we take a risk management approach to cybersecurity. And when we really push them on that, we find that most people really aren't doing risk management. They're doing incident management, but not really looking at risks. All of these events that I'm about to talk about, most of you would probably brush off and say that doesn't really sound like an issue. But when you start to put everything together, you start to say maybe the risk is larger here than what we thought about. So when we start looking at the fact that over the last 10 years, 6 refineries permanently closed along the East Coast. So Pennsylvania, New Jersey, all these refineries stopped doing business. Then we look at Hurricane Harvey and all the hurricanes that have hit since Harvey, all the refinery damage that was done down in Houston and all along the coastlines there. The refinery damage that was never fully repaired because we started operating at lesser capacity. Why? Because of the Colonial Pipeline, because of COVID. We look at the Keystone Pipeline. The Keystone Pipeline was halted back in January. So when it was halted, what did that mean? Well, that meant that all of our truckers, all of our hazardous materials semi-truck drivers were now deployed for the Alaskan run to move gas from up north down south via truck. And on top of that, we live in a world in which everybody's ordering from Amazon. COVID has taught us to get things delivered, so more and more drivers are moving away from hazardous materials to running for Amazon or running for all these other big box companies because they paid better. How many of you would like to transport hazardous material and get paid less than somebody running for Amazon? You know, there's no extra danger involved with that, right? Well, that's what they found, is that there's a shortage of hazardous driving materials. And so we have that increased on demand of fuel. Places no longer keep more than a couple of days on hand. Airports, all of these things, they no longer keep that. They're all used to it being delivered when they need it, on-demand delivery. And then, of course, we have COVID-19. It impacted the refineries probably more than just about anybody else. They were operating at minimum capacity of SARS personnel were going. There just wasn't enough need to pull those people in. We were getting more and more shipments coming in and using the pipeline to then push that through. And the last point here is the integration of IT and OT. This is something that has slipped under the radar for just about everybody. You've heard multiple speakers talk about today is the joys and wonders of our new IoT world. Sensors on everything, knowing where everything is at all times. And I think all that is great until you respond to your first incident in which somebody hacked into an organization through the thermometer in the fish tank in the lobby of the company. Or you see that somebody has used that desktop picture frame in order to hack the company because it has a Wi-Fi signal back to the corporate network. This integration of IT and OT means now that somebody can take an IT issue and make a kinetic result out of it. An IT issue, such as ransomware, can cause an outage that has physical ramifications. We've seen more and more of this over the years. It started over in the Ukraine with the Ukraine power plant hacks. Why was that such a big deal to us? How many of you know that the Ukraine power plant that was hacked was the first power plant in that part of the world that was built on the U.S. model? That was our infrastructure. We showed them how to build that. Do you think that the Russians hacked that to show the Ukrainians they meant business? Or do you think they hacked it because they're showing us they mean business? Or a little combination of both. We've integrated things that used to be standalone. Operational technology systems used to be on their own network. There was no integration to IT. You notice that the term is cyber now. We moved away from information technology or information security, information assurance. Now we've moved into cyber security. Cyber is because it was a word that meant more than IT. It's a word that means OT and IT combined. It's this integration of operations. And that's one of the focal points that we're going to talk about today. And why is this a big deal? I think the general touched on it several times. How often do you buy a new badge access system? How often do you buy a new elevator or an escalator or environmental control system? And how often are you updating your IT? We patch IT on a pretty regular basis. We're not patching our OT systems. And this is what the threat actors are going after. So let's look at the pipeline. The pipeline is 5,500 miles of pipe. It delivers natural gas, aviation fuel, all over the eastern part of the United States, going from Texas all the way up to the top there, even linking up Tennessee. It connects directly to major airports and other major installations that use gas. Products move through the main lines at about a rate of 3 to 5 miles. They have these nice little things that separate the gas. I call them torpedoes, because that's kind of what they look like. All of these things, so there used to be spots along the pipeline that people would man, and they would look at the valves, they'd look at the controls, and they would say, hey, something's not right here. All of these safety mechanisms were OT systems that were on their own network and manned at individual watch points. In this day and age, in our world of convenience, we have taken all that and we put them on our IT backbone so somebody at headquarters here in Alpharetta, Georgia, can sit there and watch all these safety controls to see if the pressure is getting too high, if things are moving too fast, make sure things are staying segmented. So on May 7th, Colonial Pipeline was hit by dark side ransomware. So they halted all of their pipeline operations. Why did they halt? Well, because from what I understand, it was their safety controls that got hit. They could no longer determine whether the system was safe. There was no way for them to monitor that. So as a precaution, they shut the pipeline down until they could validate that nothing else was done. Now, the big thing here is the threat actors were in their network for a period of time before they hit the ransomware. I always say that ransomware is the last-ditch effort of the bad guys to do what they're going to do, and then they're covering their tracks and getting out. They stole over 100 gigs of data. How much is 100 gigs of data? Probably my wife's shopping list on Amazon, but that's another issue altogether. So they ended up paying a 75 Bitcoin ransomware. I'm betting after this weekend they're wishing they had that back, But that was about $4.4 million at the time. How many of you have a spare $4.4 million laying around? Anybody? Because I could use a job. All right. So in the end, they decided to pay the ransom. They said because it was the right thing to do for the country. Why was it the right thing to do for the country? What could happen to a pipeline that would cause an impact throughout the country? Well, believe it or not, the pipeline is controlled, or at least the Sector Coordinating Council is the transportation, so the TSA. So a lot of people are like, well, I thought it was Department of Energy. I thought it was an energy asset. Actually, it is a transportation asset. It is moving energy from one place to another, but it's still transportation. So it was an impact to our transportation sector. We could not transport things. So what happens? Think about this. How long is 5,500 miles? All the way up to New Jersey. You can no longer get gas from here to there. Where are all our truckers? They're all up on the Alaskan pipeline. They're all delivering for Amazon. How do we get gas from there to there now? How do we get it to all the different places that it needs to go to? All of these airports and stuff that need it. That's what we're looking at is so you had an impact to the transportation industry, which then impacts the energy sector. Now we can no longer supply energy to the people that need it. That's our first domino. But then that goes right back to the transportation sector. All those airports. We started having airports canceling flights. They no longer had enough gas on hand. They started making flights, especially flights from Atlanta and going over to Hawaii. They were putting in 2 additional refueling stops out on the West Coast because we couldn't fuel them up here. We could only give them enough gas to get them to California. So that was the impact. And we started impacting transportation, whether it be air traffic or even people, trying to get emergency services. That was our next thing. How do you put ambulances on the road if you can't guarantee gas? In emergency services, we can start jumping from there. How do you do health care without emergency services? If you can't get people to the hospital, how are you doing health care? If you can't make sure that you have generators running, we're getting ready to hit hurricane season. Hospitals started really getting concerned, saying a hurricane could hit us. I don't have enough gas here. If the pipeline's not up, what's going to happen to me? How do I make sure that people don't die on life support because I don't have energy? Critical manufacturing. All those petroleum products that go into the things that we make every day. Suddenly there was a shortage of that. They couldn't make things. The chemical industry. Suddenly all those hazardous materials that they were moving from chemical company to chemical company, all those drivers are now being offered bigger money to go drive for gas companies. So they were leaving to go now because there was emergency mandates issued by governors to get the fuel moving. So they started pulling people away from the chemical industry in order to supply gas for the energy companies. So you start to see, I could keep going over and over and start putting X's on every single one of these boxes, all because of one pipeline. When we're talking about the domino effect, that's what we're talking about, is an impact to one impacts everything around it. It's not an easy thing to look at. So the butterfly effect, we already talked about this. The airline schedule's changing. Hazardous material drivers diverted. My favorite, panic buying. How many of you had neighbors that were rushing off to grab some gasoline while they could? They could store it in containers. I love these pictures. The people over at GEMA here, they kept sending me pictures of people that they had plastic bags full of gasoline. I'm sure you've all seen the car that burst into flame because of it. That's what we start to get into is you start to get this. That was the residual effect of the pipeline going down is panic buying. You even had people getting into altercations over gas and gas prices. We had emergency, Georgia declared a state of emergency. Here in Georgia, we suspended fuel or state taxes on fuel. So if you were a driver driving across Georgia with gas, we weren't collecting taxes on that. So the revenue that we lost in order to get that done. They actually changed laws in Tennessee in order for people to start going to work and to start doing things with hazardous materials because there just wasn't enough people to do it. We even had the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission had to put an alert out to tell people, don't put gas in plastic bags. Bill Engvall would say, here's your sign. But think about this in your own business. Think about everybody that you, so we showed you that asset and operations to service to mission, but it's not just you, that's your mission. Everybody that you do business with, everybody that you have links to, they have their own assets, their own operations, their own services, their own mission. And it's all tying back to you. You need materials, or you need quality, you need logistics, you need deliveries, you have deadlines, your reputation's at stake, there's schedules to go on. If I'm supposed to be your Uber driver and you have a 7 o'clock movie and you schedule me at 6:30 and I don't show up until 6:50, you're going to be upset, right? So imagine a cyber attack in the smallest widget provider, and it impact their ability to get widgets to somebody else. And then they can't make a part that goes into the computer that you then need. That's what we're looking at here, is this ripple effect. A small industry can cause a huge impact. Like I said, we could scroll back through and we could take the pipeline out of this. We could put anything in there. Let's talk about COVID. How did COVID change our world? How many of you remember the shipping tankers sitting out off the coast because we were afraid of the virus getting into the United States? In the role that I play, I got to see the impact of that. I got to see critical manufacturing that's done in real time, on-demand deliveries that suddenly couldn't fulfill orders. We had a shortage in microchips. Suddenly computers weren't getting made. We couldn't get things done. And then when COVID finally did hit us, we started dispersing our workforce. Suddenly all that data that you used to have in the office, all in one huddle, was dispersed across geographic locations. How did your perimeter was no longer protecting them? How were people still able to do their jobs? We adapted very quickly, but it was a ripple effect. Things slowed way down for a while before they got back to speed. When you're doing risk management for your organization, it needs to be more than just what you're doing. It's what everybody you're doing business with is doing as well. Are they about to be bought out? Are they having a cyber attack? What's their cyber security look like? How would you respond with each other? How would you do incident response? I'm going to tell you, I get called in to do a lot of incident response. Everything from the city of Atlanta when they got hit, Colonial Pipeline, school districts, everybody that gets hit. And the first thing that usually happens as we're dealing with incident response, so you're dealing with your incidents and your phone's ringing off the hook. Everybody you do business with wants to know what happened. Am I going to be impacted too? Everybody that you have an interconnection with, everybody that does business with you, they want to know if they're going to be hurt too. Are the bad guys in their system? Are they what caused your system to go down? Think about that. You have one person dedicated to doing nothing but trying to talk your customers or your partners off the ledge that you've got everything under control, that you're dealing with things. You'll let them know information when you can. Because you can't tell them exactly what happened because you haven't found patient zero yet. You don't know if the bad guys are still in your network. So you have to kind of be coy about things, and yet everybody's calling you. The bad guys are doing what they call island hopping. They're getting into the smallest company and jumping from that small company to the next larger company to the next larger company, which is why the DOD is so worried about, anybody who does business with them has to meet a minimum security model. We don't have that in the critical infrastructure sector. We usually just say, oh, you want to come help us? You want to provide a service for us? Okay, that's great. We maybe say, oh, are you a SOC 2 type 2 data center? Okay, then you're fine. But we don't look at their processes. We don't exercise with them. We're not talking to them. So when an incident happens, it's really hard to get to know what they do, what they bring to the table, should they be assisting us. My first mentor used to always tell me it's hard to make friends in a foxhole. You might be in the wrong foxhole, not with the people that you need to be with. You might have equipment they need in that foxhole over there. Or if you're starting to shake hands and get to know people, you really don't know what you bring to the table. You're wasting the one thing you don't have, and that's time. So that's what we're looking at here, is it's not just about you anymore. It's about you and everybody you do business with. It's about holding each other accountable. It's about looking at even your smallest widget provider and saying, I need to know that you're doing things securely because you have access to my information. Or you have the ability to take me down, and if I go down, everybody I do business with goes down too, or I impact somebody else. And so that's what I'm going to close on today, is talking about you need a plan. And you'll notice that I didn't say just an incident response plan, because most of this is about business continuity. Can you sustain your operations? We talk all the time about the difference between the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. FBI is threat response. They want to put handcuffs on bad guys. We at DHS, we want to do what we call asset response. We want to ensure you don't go down. Why? Because we saw what happens when something goes down. Like when the pipeline goes down, it impacts everything around it. We need to minimize that, get people back up and operational as quick as possible. That's what you need is business continuity. How can you stop from impacting those around you? Or how can you sustain yourself if the people that you depend on a day-to-day basis are no longer operational? And then out-of-band communications. How are you going to talk? Most people don't realize that if the bad guys have your network, they're probably looking at your emails. How do you do incident response when the bad guys are reading exactly what you're about to do to them? Oh, they're going to try and contain us in segment A over here? Well, we'll just move to segment B. So I can't stress this enough. Please have a plan. Please exercise that plan. And don't exercise with just your own organization. Exercise with everybody. Bring all of your partners in. If you need help doing that, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to assist you with figuring out who should be part of your plan and how to exercise with them, bring you scenarios that you can do, and work with the greater community. If you want to do ecosystem exercises where you're exercising with everybody in a certain ecosystem or everybody in a certain infrastructure, we can make that happen too. But you have to exercise. You wouldn't send your football team out to play a game on Sunday if they hadn't practiced. You wouldn't send firefighters out to fight a fire if they hadn't worked together, if they didn't know what a fire was. And yet we see that all the time with incident responders on the cyber side. You have to make sure that you exercise. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with is a couple things to think about is what would you do in the first 30 minutes of a cyber attack, whether it happened to you or to one of your business partners? What do you need to know? What data? Could you collect that data in 30 minutes? This is the best exercise you can do is say, I've just been hit with ransomware. How would I buy a Bitcoin? How would I figure out what I got hit with? How would I figure out what's impacted? What information do I need to know as a responder? What can I bring to the table? Do I need to know Klint's phone number? Is that something good to have? Do I need local law enforcement? Do I need FBI, CISA? Do I need to call in the National Guard? Who can assist me? So think about all these things. What do you need to know, and how fast can you bring it to bear so that you're minimizing the impact to your organization and everybody else around you? It is the domino effect for a reason. Only you can pull that domino out to keep the rest from falling. It really relies on you because we don't own or operate 80% of critical infrastructure. We're here to assist you with security, but it's your job to do it. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Left us hanging. Talked about ransomware and that they paid it, and then they said it was for the good of the nation. And then you spent the next 20 minutes saying, here's all the dominoes that affected. Implying that was good for the nation. As a novice, I always think, don't pay the ransomware. That's what's not good for the nation. But is it a matter of where you're at in the domino chain? That if you're going to knock down a whole bunch of dominoes, maybe it's good to pay that risk having ransomware attacks repeated because it got away.
So I'm going to state the federal line, which is never, ever pay the ransom. And then I'm going to tell you about Colonial Pipeline. So Colonial Pipeline paid the ransom. They got the decryption tool. They started using the decryption tool. The decryption tool was incredibly slow with the amount of data that was encrypted, like really slow. They found that it was actually faster and better for them to restore from backup. So they actually ended up not using the decryption tool except for on the very critical data they had and just restoring from backup on everything else. So I think for them, the paying of the ransom was more, they're going to spin it as for the good of the nation. Maybe they were getting pressure from somebody in order to do that because of how long they were down. But it might have been more about the bad guys saying they were going to leak that 100 gigs of data out to the public or sell that intellectual property off to somebody, just as much as it was about getting their current operations up. The real fear and the real reason that they kind of took the pipeline down is because they didn't know, in the beginning, how long the threat actor had been in their network or if any other damage was done. They were worried that the safety controls might have been tampered with, or if they put everything into a restart, even if they restored from backup and tried to restart it, that a lot of those safety controls might now have new, values. Like with what happens with Oldsmar, the water treatment plant down in Florida a couple of months ago. I don't know if you're familiar with this one or not, but somebody hacked into the Oldsmar Water Company and changed their safety valve or safety levels on their water so that it was now, if it had gone unnoticed, could have made the water, toxic to people to drink. So that's what they were worried about, is something to that level, a kinetic effect happening because of a cyber issue. Like I said, the threat actors are smart enough now that they're going in, they're making all of their changes to the network, they're doing bad things, and then saying, oh, you're going to figure this out unless I encrypt everything. Once I encrypt it, I know you're going to restore from backup. Your backup is going to have happened before I did the bad thing. So all the stuff that I just did is now wiped away. At least the footprints that show you that I did it are wiped away. And now you don't know, you can't trust your own data. We always talk about the triad with cybersecurity: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. After a ransomware attack, integrity, that's the thing that you can never be sure of. If you've ever taken a sentence, put it into Google Translate, and then bring it back to English. So whatever language you want, put it into German, then bring it back from German to English. Does it look exactly like it did before you put it in? No. And that's what happens when you encrypt something and then decrypt it. The data comes back, but it's not the way that it was before. Imagine if that was financial data that was encrypted and decrypted. Is integrity. Can you guarantee that that $1,000 in that person's bank account, was it $1,000 before it happened? And it's $1,000 now? Or is it $10,000 now and it was only $1,000 before? You just don't know. All those schemas, all those charts, all those tables, all those things, Active Directory, all those backup files, what changed? And that's why most companies don't pay the ransom, is because you never get that sense of integrity once you've been encrypted and decrypted. They go back and they say, I would rather know that I've lost some data, but I know that my data is right. We're worried about integrity when it comes to ransomware. The confidentiality, yeah, they stole the data. Confidentiality is out the window. Availability, they've taken your availability away, but it's really, when you're back up and running, it's the integrity. That's the piece that most people can never overcome, is that integrity piece. So it is a business decision on whether to pay the ransom or not. I'm always going to tell you don't. It just perpetuates the model. But you have to make the decision on your own, because I don't know what your backups look like. I don't know what your capabilities are. Yes, sir.
Thanks. You talked about the first 30 minutes actions that we take. I've got several skills on item number 4 myself. First inkling is to sever that connection to the outside world, or close the door. But in doing so, you potentially lose some forensic information that may come with that. You talk about the pros and cons of what should happen in that first 30 minutes.
So containment is always a big thing, and I have a whole other talk around incident response that I love to do. But containment is key. And yes, unplugging from the network, you might lose a little bit. What we find most often, though, is people want to shut the system down. And I think Al is going to talk more about this later with his forensic stuff. That's where you're losing key evidence. That's where you're losing things, is when you shut the system down. You're losing anything resident in memory. So that short-term memory, that's really what you want to try and get a hold of. What we find most often, we have a whole service that we provide at CISA called the Validated Architecture Design Review. Best acronym in the government, the VADR. The VADR is designed because what we find most often is that people, what you think that you need from a operational standpoint, the logs that you're looking at, the logs you think you need to keep are here. And you're like, oh, I want my SIM solution or my IDS solution. I want to look at those logs that are due to operational nature. Well, from a forensic standpoint, the logs that we need or that we can recreate to say a bad guy did X, Y, or Z, they're completely different than that. And your security tools aren't pointing at those. Or you're not monitoring that traffic, you're not flagging that traffic. And that's the problem that we normally come in. Whenever we or the FBI show up, a lot of times we're asking for logs, and you're like, well, I don't think we backed those up. Or we only keep 30 days of those. And it's like, well, the guy's been in your network. On average, the average threat actor is in a network for at least 90 days. In 2020, I think that they said it was up to 164 days that the threat actor was in the network. What could you do in 164 days inside somebody's network? Could you recreate it? Ask yourself, could you, from log files, recreate patient 0 164 days ago? Because if you haven't found patient 0, whether you pay the ransom or don't pay the ransom, you're probably going to get hit again. If you've never found out how they got in, you're probably going to get hit again. And that's the thing. A lot of ransomware actors now are giving you a guarantee, cross my fingers, whatever, that I won't hit you again. Yeah, we're not seeing them really stick to that. But they're offering it anyway if it makes you feel better about paying the ransom. But that's the thing. So segmenting, yes, getting it off the network is good. Shutting it down is not good. Hopefully you have security tools deployed in the right places where we can still recover the logs we need without having to have it on the network. So I hope I answered your question with that, sir. Yes, sir. I don't think it provides any greater security. We have to move away from a model of what they used to call the perimeter model for security. We're now to what they're calling zero trust. That's been, I think, every major security conference for the last 3 years has been talking about this zero trust model, is that it's not about how much data you have, it's do you classify your data. And I'm not talking about the DoD classifications, is it secret, top secret, or unclassified. I'm saying, do you know where your crown jewels are? We get called in to do incident response, and we're like, okay, let's figure out, they're like, oh, we really want to make sure they didn't get this intellectual property, it's over here. We're like, okay, so we're going to look around and make sure that this is okay. And then we have a second team that's going, are you sure that's the only place that intellectual property is on your network? And they're like, yes, we're very positive. We're like, do you mind if we scan your network and look around? And guess what? More often than not, I'm going to say 90% of the time, we find at least 12 to 15 other duplicates of that intellectual property on other people's machines. People who copied it off in order to do work with it. People who moved it in order to, because it was a legacy drive or a legacy system or they needed it for a project. People who had access to things, paper copies of it laying around. So we're saying, you've been securing, you put all of your security around your crown jewels over here, but they were also here, 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 and here, and you have no security over there. So it's not about how much data you have, it's do you know what data is valuable to you? A lot of people might say, well, the bad guys don't know what's valuable to you either. They're just going to pull everything. And maybe if you have so much data on your network, you're going to notice them pulling the data off. Like they pulled 100 gigs off of Colonial Pipeline. Would you notice 100 gigs going out your door? It's more about, are you flagging, are you monitoring, are you looking for what's important to you? And too often when we get called in, people are like, I want to know if they took anything important for us. We're like, okay, what's important to you? And they're like, well, you tell us. I was like, well, I can't tell you what's important to you. I don't know your business model, and people don't even know what's important to them. They don't know that Bob is the person who knows how to do everything, and if Bob retires, nobody else can do that. They don't know that this system over here is actually operational and the key to everything. Got a funny story about that. I'll do it real fast, I know. Working with a company, actually the state government in North Carolina, and they were telling us this story about how they were leasing a building in downtown North Carolina, and they decided they wanted to own the property, they wanted to buy a different property, move their entire operations to this other building. So they cut the lease. They said at the end of this year, we're moving everybody over to our new facility. They moved all the IT equipment. They moved all the people. They kept the redundant connection up, kept everything talking till the day that it was finalized. Then they cut that connection. Their entire system went down. So they immediately put the connection back, trying to figure things out, can't figure out what's going on because everything comes back up. And so they sit there and they keep doing that. Every time they cut the connection, their systems go down. Their entire network keeps going down. They can't figure it out. And somebody says, you know what? Bob is the one who designed this. Bob retired 5 years ago. Let's call Bob. Maybe Bob knows. Luckily, Bob was still around, and Bob said, yeah. He goes, okay, so where'd you put the dish? And they're like, what dish? He's like, well, the one that sits up on top of the roof, that big monolith up there. And they're like, well, we didn't bring that over. That's legacy. We don't need that anymore. He's like, without that dish, the system doesn't run. That dish ties everything together. Bob's the only one who knew that because Bob designed it. And so without that, if Bob hadn't been willing to give them that information, it would have taken them a long time to figure that out. A lot of times organizations don't know what's important to them. They don't know that a thermometer in a fish tank in their lobby can cause them problems. When I did pen testing, my favorite way was through HVAC systems. I would own your HVAC system, I'd own your network. Everything on your network can be a potential problem. You have to figure out what's important to you. You can't, as the general said, you can't protect everything, but you can protect the things that you think are critical. Zero trust model. Don't trust anything. Protect the things that you have to. Let everything else go. Because it's no longer a matter of if you're going to get hit, it's when you're going to get hit. And it's no longer a matter of when you're going to get hit, it's how fast can you respond. How fast can you keep your business up and operational? How fast can you get things moved around and make the impact lessen, not just for yourself, but for everybody else? All right, thank you. Any other questions before I say my last thank you? Because I'll sit up here and talk all day. So, all right, thank you very much. I had a good time.
Cool.